I agree with a lot of Michael's analysis. I disagree with him on a couple of points. I suppose just to start with where I disagree with Michael. Firstly, in terms of, Michael's absolutely correct in saying that we need to move on to the debate about where we generate wealth. There's a lot that can be done in that. The most obvious example in Ireland at the moment is relating to our gas and oil supplies, which is a massive source of income potentially for Ireland. Over the next several years, if that was produced and was in national ownership, would bring in up to 300 billion euro for the Irish people. And that's all been handed over to wealth. And there's a whole other range of areas where we could be talking about generating wealth. But I think it's very important that we realise that the starting point for us in the current context we're in should be talking about redistribution of wealth. It's completely missing in the mainstream of the debate that's happening at the moment. What the Fianna Fáil have managed to do very successfully, really with the assistance of the rest of the establishment, is the whole private sector versus public sector conflict, and it's a false conflict. And the first way that we need to address that is by pointing out very clearly that the wealth has not disappeared in the country, and that rather than accepting the consensus that we need to be cutting back, what we should be doing is targeting wealth. If we can get that far, then we should start talking about how we can generate wealth also. Just maybe to give you an example of how far I think the consensus has gone in terms of this general acceptance of 4 billion and so forth. And it's worth thinking back about a year ago, over a year ago. Over a year ago, your average person in the street was saying that the wealthy must pay for this crisis, that the bankers cannot have us pay for their bailout, and so forth. That was your average instinct. Now your average instinct is, it's awful unfortunate, isn't it, but don't we have to accept these cuts? I was talking to my postman this morning, who's a good union activist, one of the more left-wing people I know in my local area, and he said to me, but I guess we have to accept the cuts, don't we? And for someone like that to be arriving at that conclusion shows the kind of serious situation we're in. I think, this started unravelling, and it's worth noting where it started unravelling. It really started unravelling last March when ICTU pulled out of the national strike action that was meant to take place. And also, before ICTU pulled out of that, you had the leader of the Labour Party calling on workers not to strike. And in more recent time as well, you've had the leader of the Labour Party calling on workers not to strike. In fact, the position on the budget articulated by the leadership was that public sector workers should not only accept the 4 billion cuts, not only accept pay cuts of 1.3 billion, but in return they should promise no industrial action, which I think is an unprecedented approach for coming from those quarters. It's worth noting as well, Michael was making the point about, in terms of stimulus, and that's not exactly just a left-wing position to argue for stimulus. I was at a meeting yesterday with local retailers and shop owners in the Hote area, and Fergal Quinn was there, and Fergal Quinn was talking about the need for stimulus, and Fergal Quinn, of all people, was talking about how there was a massive amount of wealth still in the country, and in terms of retail, the problem was that people with wealth weren't spending it. So if someone like that is able to make those sort of arguments, there's no reason why anyone on the left at all shouldn't be putting forward those arguments. Just want to talk a little bit about where will change come from, and it's the last point that I'll disagree with Michael on. Michael said that in the Labour Party we could do with help moving the Labour leadership to a progressive agenda. We could certainly do with help, but I don't hold out for waiting or trying to influence either the leaders of the more moderate unions or the leaders of left parties and so forth to adopt better positions. We could be waiting a long time for them to come around to a left-wing analysis. So it's really much more important that we think about what we can do, everyone in this room, because as Michael was saying, we are generally in different organisations and in none, and we are, the left in Ireland is quite small. And for us to actually interject ideas into the mainstream discourse that's happening at the moment, I think it's going to require a lot more cooperation amongst us all. I'm not arguing for that we all have to be in the one organisation. I'm not arguing that we have to tactical unity, but I am arguing that we need to have a lot more cooperation on the left. And I think the basis, I think that we should have a broad basis for how we cooperate and what we need to agree on. I think there's 3 things in particular that we need to agree on, and anyone who agrees with that, I think that's a basis for cooperation on what we can cooperate on. I would say what they are is, in the first instance, an absolute clear rejection of the cuts agenda and this 4 billion consensus. There has to be a starting point. If you don't see that they're basically a made-up bunch of figures that Fianna Fáil have imposed into the mainstream debate, then there's probably not a lot that we can cooperate on there. The second point is that unequivocally we need to support everyone who's resisting cuts, be that union members, organised labour, or people in communities, and we need to do that absolutely unequivocally. And I think the third point that we need to agree on is that the alternative to the agenda of cuts is taxing wealth. And yes, we should move on to talking about generating wealth thereafter. It is, with the context that we're in, it would be easy for us all to say, well, we've over the last year we have taken a hammering in terms of the debate. And I think it's important that we look at the positives that there are out there as well at the moment. To give you a couple of examples, I think it was very, very clear in the last elections in June, the European and local elections, that people in Ireland were overwhelmingly voting for change. The combined Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael vote was down to a all-time low of just about 54%. The combined left vote of Sinn Féin, Labour and the Socialist Party was over 30%. And that was a record high, and I think people are moving towards that. I think it would have been quite unpredictable even a few months before the European elections that we would have had a situation where in Dublin in the Euro elections we would have had Prunchestrasse and Joe Higgins returned and no Fianna Fáil MEP. We forget these breakthroughs sometimes quickly. My area in Baldoyle, when we were knocking on doors, people were telling us that we had enough of Fianna Fáil and enough of Fine Gael and that they wouldn't be voting for them. And people sometimes say that, but when the results actually came out, what we saw is that Labour came in first, the Socialist Party came in second, Independents came in third, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were far behind that. And this is in an area that up till very recently always returned Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael councillors. 80%, 90% of the vote was for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So that's a massive change. Recently, and I know a lot of the issues, there's issues around how the union movement has reacted since this, but it is significant that on November 24th that there was 250,000 workers out on strike in a united day of action. And that is unprecedented in recent years and hasn't happened in a while. And we also know that opinion polls are consistently showing that over 70% of people are in favour of raising taxes on the well-off as a means of paying for this crisis rather than supporting cuts. So there is a lot to be optimistic on at the moment. My final point is essentially this, that what we're up against in terms of the employers, the right-wing parties, the political establishment, independent newspapers and so forth, what we're up against is a group that use every means and every tactic at their disposal to push through their agenda. And we've seen that over the last year. We've been barraged for the last year with a repeated message of we must have 4 billion in cuts. They use every bit of rhetoric. They talk about the need for us all pulling together, we're all in this together. They talk about the national interest and so forth to hammer home their agenda. They're prepared to rob from people on social welfare to pay for their bank bailout. And because they're so committed and so determined, I think we need to be absolutely committed and determined in our response as well. I think that's why we don't have the choice or the luxury anymore in terms of whether or not we cooperate more on the left. I think we have to resolve to do that, and I think 2010 has to be the year where we break from our old routines of blaming the usual suspects, social partnership, the media and so forth, and we really get our act together ourselves in terms of providing an alternative voice to the right-wing consensus. Thank you.